Blood dripped from her knuckles as nightmares materialized. Lydia Park never imagined her janitor's routine would culminate in violence, yet here she stood over unconscious assailants who'd targeted the CEO. How single mom saved the CEO's life became her reality was baffling. More shocking still was his offer she couldn't possibly refuse. Her daughter's safety now hinged on accepting both his proposition and the dangerous intimacy it promised. Lydia Park's knuckles were raw from scrubbing the 42nd floor executive bathroom of Sterling Tower for the third time that day. The midnight shift was a blessing and a curse. The solitude allowed her mind to wander without interruption. But the echo of her movements in the empty building sometimes amplified the hollowness she'd carried since David's death 3 years ago. She straightened her back, wincing at the familiar ache between her shoulder blades, and gazed at her reflection in the immaculate mirror she'd just polished. At 35, the lines around her eyes had deepened, not just from age, but from the constant vigilance of raising 9-year-old Maya alone, while juggling 3 jobs to keep them afloat in their modest 2-bedroom apartment on the city's east side. The cleaning cart squeaked as she guided it toward the elevator, her footsteps whispering against the marble floor of the executive suite. Before David's accident, she taught martial arts at their small family dojo, a place where strength was celebrated, where her body was an instrument of discipline and power. Now her strength was channeled into invisible work, sanitizing toilet bowls, emptying trash bins, and wiping away fingerprints of people who would never know her name. The irony wasn't lost on her that the skills she once taught, balance, precision, awareness, now served her in navigating the precarious edge of financial survival, rather than the edge of a fighting mat. She checked her watch, 1:17 a.m., and calculated the minutes until she could return home, slip into Maya's room, and watch her daughter's chest rise and fall in peaceful sleep before collapsing into her own bed for a few precious hours. The elevator descended toward the underground parking garage, carrying Lydia and her cart of cleaning supplies toward the final task of her shift. The basement level required weekly deep cleaning, and tonight was the night for the thankless job of scrubbing the concrete floors and disinfecting the stairwells, where cigarette butts and discarded coffee cups accumulated, despite the building's strict policies. As the doors slid open with a soft ping, the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting alternating shadows and harsh white illumination across the rows of expensive vehicles, tangible symbols of the wealth gap between Lydia and Sterling Tower's daytime occupants. She pushed her cart forward, the wheels catching on the uneven concrete, sending a jolt up her tired arms. Something felt off about the energy in the cavernous space, a stillness that seemed too deliberate, a silence that felt expectant rather than empty. Years of martial arts training had honed Lydia's senses to detect subtle shifts in atmosphere, the presence of intent before the manifestation of action. She paused, leaving her cart beside a concrete pillar, and listened. The soft hum of the ventilation system provided a background drone, but beneath it, she detected the shuffle of movement, too controlled to be casual, too measured to be innocent. Instinctively, her body shifted into a more balanced stance, weight evenly distributed, hands relaxed but ready at her sides. The muscles in her legs, dormant for too long, remembered their purpose as adrenaline began to trickle into her bloodstream. A car engine rumbled to life at the far end of the garage, headlights cutting through the dimness, as a sleek black Tesla pulled out of a reserved parking space. Lydia recognized the vehicle. It belonged to Elias Ward, the CEO of Sterling Enterprises, who was known for working late into the night. What caught her attention, however, was not the car, but the shadowy figures that emerged from behind concrete pillars as the vehicle approached the exit ramp. 3 men dressed in dark clothing, faces obscured by balaclavas, moved with predatory coordination to intercept the Tesla. One carried something metallic that caught the light, a crowbar or tire iron, while another reached beneath his jacket in a motion Lydia recognized with stomach-dropping clarity. She had seconds to decide: retreat to the elevator and call security, or act on the combat instincts that were now fully awakened after years of dormancy. The decision made itself as the Tesla slowed at the security gate and the armed men closed in. Lydia abandoned her cart and moved silently along the perimeter of the garage, using the parked cars as cover. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her breathing remained controlled as muscle memory took over. 3 against 1 were poor odds, but surprise was on her side, and these men, focused on their target, had failed to notice the janitor who blended into the background of their carefully planned ambush. As the first attacker raised his weapon toward the driver's side window, Lydia launched forward, years of training crystallizing into pure, focused action. Maya, she whispered to herself, a talisman against fear, as she stepped out of invisibility and into a confrontation that would irrevocably alter the careful boundaries of her circumscribed life. Blood pounded in Lydia's ears as she stood over the 3 unconscious men, her breath coming in controlled waves that belied the chaos of the past few minutes. The garage was eerily silent now, save for the idling engine of Elias Ward's Tesla and the distant wail of approaching sirens that someone, perhaps the CEO himself, had summoned. Her body hummed with the aftermath of adrenaline, muscle memory that had lain dormant for years now fully awakened. The first attacker had gone down easily, unprepared for the precise strike to his solar plexus, followed by a sweep that took his legs out from under him. The second and third had been more difficult, requiring all her skill to neutralize without sustaining serious injury, though her knuckles were raw and bleeding, and tomorrow she would discover bruises blooming across her ribs where one assailant had landed a solid blow. The driver's door of the Tesla opened slowly, and Elias Ward emerged, his tall frame unfolding with a caution that gradually transformed into astonishment as he surveyed the scene. His tailored suit jacket was slightly askew, his normally impeccable appearance disrupted by the near miss with violence. From her position as a nighttime janitor, Lydia had glimpsed him occasionally, striding through the lobby with purpose, issuing directives to a trailing entourage of assistants and executives, but had never been close enough to notice the intensity of his gray eyes, now fixed upon her with a mixture of disbelief and calculation. He was younger than she'd expected for someone who commanded a corporate empire, perhaps in his early 40s, with dark hair threaded with silver at the temples and a face that spoke of both privilege and burden. "You're bleeding," he said, and Lydia realized he was right. Warm stickiness trickled from her split lip and knuckles, smearing the sleeves of her gray uniform where she had wiped her hands. The metallic tang of blood filled her mouth, grounding her in the reality of what had just transpired. She had violated the careful boundaries of her existence, stepping out of invisibility into a spotlight she had spent years avoiding. Questions tumbled through her mind. Would she lose her job for interfering? Would her name appear in police reports? Would Maya be at risk if these men had accomplices? The weight of consequences pressed against her chest, threatening to collapse the momentary strength that had carried her through the confrontation. Security personnel flooded into the garage, followed closely by police officers with hands hovering near holstered weapons. Lydia found herself separated from the CEO, guided to a concrete bench where paramedics examined her injuries, despite her protests that she was fine. She watched as Elias Ward spoke with authority to uniformed officers, occasionally glancing in her direction with an expression she couldn't decipher. The men she had neutralized were handcuffed and removed from the scene, one still unconscious and carried on a stretcher. The garage transformed into a flurry of activity, evidence markers placed where weapons had fallen, photographs taken of the scene, statements recorded. Lydia answered questions mechanically, providing only the necessary details, conscious that each word pulled her further from the anonymity that had been her shield. Dawn was breaking by the time the police finished their questioning, painting the concrete walls of the garage with pale gold light that seemed incongruous with the violence that had unfolded hours before. Lydia's supervisor had been called, arriving with wide eyes and a stream of questions that Lydia deflected with weary politeness. She was told to take the day off, perhaps several days, until the company determined how to proceed. The implication hung unspoken. Her job might be in jeopardy despite, or perhaps because of, her actions. As she gathered her belongings, preparing to catch the early morning bus that would take her to Maya's school for morning drop-off, She felt a presence behind her and turned to find Elias Ward standing there, his expression inscrutable but somehow resolute. "Ms. Park," he said, and the fact that he knew her name sent a jolt of unease through her exhausted body. "I believe we need to talk. Not here, not now, but soon. What you did tonight." He paused, seeming to search for adequate words before continuing. "It wasn't just extraordinary. It may have saved my life, but it's also complicated things in ways you don't yet understand." He extended a business card, the heavy cardstock embossed with the Sterling Enterprises logo, and his name in raised letters. "Call this number at noon today. It's my private line. What happened here isn't over, and your safety, and your daughter's, may depend on what we discuss." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, surrounded by security personnel who formed a protective barrier between him and the world, leaving Lydia standing alone with a card in her trembling hand, and the dawning realization that the careful life she had constructed was about to unravel in ways she couldn't begin to predict. Maya's laughter echoed through their modest apartment as she recounted a story from school, her animated hands punctuating each detail with the exuberance only a 9-year-old could sustain at 7 in the morning. Lydia watched her daughter from behind a mug of strong black coffee, her bruised knuckles carefully hidden beneath the kitchen table, a concealer stick applied with precision to the cut on her lip. The normalcy of the moment, Maya in her school uniform, backpack ready by the door, breakfast dishes in the sink, stood in stark contrast to the events of the previous night, creating a cognitive dissonance that made Lydia's head throb dully. She had managed 2 hours of restless sleep after returning home from the garage incident, her body aching but her mind too alert to surrender to proper rest. Now, as morning routine unfolded with deceptive ordinariness, the business card from Elias Ward seemed to burn in her pocket, a harbinger of disruption she wasn't prepared to face. "Mom, you're not listening," Maya said, her dark eyes, so like David's, narrowing with the perceptiveness that sometimes caught Lydia off guard. Despite her efforts to shield her daughter from adult concerns, Maya had developed an uncanny ability to detect when something was amiss, perhaps a survival adaptation to the seismic shift of losing her father at such a young age. Lydia forced a smile, reaching across the table to tuck a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear, a gesture of affection that doubled as misdirection. "I'm listening, sweetheart. Mrs. Chen said your science project was the best in the class, right? The one about plant growth in different light conditions?" Maya nodded, though her expression remained skeptical, a miniature mirror of Lydia's own tendency toward caution and observation. The walk to school was mercifully uneventful, giving Lydia time to consider the impending noon phone call and what it might entail. Elias Ward's words replayed in her mind. "Your safety and your daughter's may depend on what we discuss." The implication was clear enough to send cold dread threading through her veins. Whatever she had stumbled into last night had consequences beyond a simple mugging attempt. The attackers had been coordinated, prepared, professionals targeting one of the city's most powerful business figures, and now somehow she had inserted herself into their awareness. As she kissed Maya goodbye at the school gates, watching her daughter skip toward the building where teachers monitored the morning influx of students, Lydia felt a renewed surge of protectiveness that bordered on panic. Maya was everything, the center of her universe, the reason she had pulled herself from grief's abyss after David's death, the singular purpose that drove her through exhausting days and nights of menial labor. Back in the apartment, Lydia moved methodically through a series of exercises, stretches, forms, and controlled movements that she had once practiced and taught daily at the dojo. Her muscles protested after years of neglect, but the familiar patterns brought a measure of clarity and calm. The martial arts had been more than physical training. They had been a philosophy, a way of centering herself in chaos, of finding balance when the world tilted unpredictably. She had abandoned this practice after losing David, their shared dream of the dojo too painful to sustain alone, while juggling the immediate demands of single parenthood. Now, As she moved through sequences with increasing fluidity, she recognized how much of herself she had set aside in the name of survival. Not just financial survival, but emotional preservation, a narrowing of life to only what was necessary and manageable. At precisely noon, Lydia held Elias Ward's business card in one hand and her phone in the other, hesitation making her fingers unnaturally stiff. The choice before her felt monumental: to step further into whatever dangerous current had been set in motion last night, or to attempt retreat, to cling to the illusion of safety that routine and invisibility had provided. She thought again of Maya, of her bright future that depended on stability and security, and knew that ignoring the threat wouldn't make it disappear. With resolution steadying her hand, she dialed the number, counting the rings, 1, 2, before a deep voice answered, not with a traditional greeting, but with immediate recognition. "Ms. Park, thank you for calling. I've sent a car to your address. It should arrive within 5 minutes. I believe it's in both our interests to continue this conversation in person, in a secure location." The sleek black company car with tinted windows that arrived exactly when promised seemed to embody everything about Sterling Enterprises: precision, wealth, and an aura of untouchable power. The driver, a woman with the alert posture of someone with security training, opened the door without speaking, her eyes scanning the street with practiced vigilance. As Lydia settled into the leather seat, a sense of surreal displacement washed over her. Less than 24 hours ago, she had been invisible within the Sterling Tower, a nocturnal presence who emptied trash and wiped surfaces clean of other people's fingerprints. Now she was being transported like someone of consequence, though whether as an asset or a liability remained unclear. The car merged smoothly into midday traffic, carrying her towards Sterling Tower, not through the service entrance she normally used, but to the private executive entrance where Elias Ward waited, his expression grave, as he gestured her toward an elevator that required a key card and fingerprint scan to ascend to floors she had cleaned, but never properly seen in daylight. The executive floor of Sterling Tower bore little resemblance to the sterile, empty spaces Lydia navigated during her night shifts. By day, it hummed with purposeful energy, assistants moving with brisk efficiency between glass-walled offices, the soft murmur of important conversations, the subtle scent of expensive cologne and freshly brewed artisanal coffee. She felt acutely out of place in her simple jeans and button-down shirt, the best she had been able to assemble from her limited wardrobe on short notice. Elias Ward guided her past curious glances toward a conference room at the end of the hallway, its walls transitioning from clear glass to frosted privacy at the touch of a button after they entered. A security officer stood discreetly by the door, not uniformed like the lobby guards Lydia was accustomed to seeing, but a man in a tailored suit whose watchful eyes and poised stance spoke of specialized training. "Please, sit," Elias gestured toward a chair at the polished conference table, taking the seat across from her rather than at the head, a subtle equalizing gesture she didn't miss. Before continuing, he studied her with the same intensity she had glimpsed in the garage, as though cataloging details for future reference. Up close, in the unforgiving light of midday, she could see the fine lines of stress around his eyes, the slight tension in his jaw that suggested the weight of responsibilities beyond her comprehension. "What I'm about to share with you is confidential," he began, his voice measured and precise. "But given the circumstances, you deserve to know the full scope of what you've inadvertently become involved in. The men who attacked me last night weren't random criminals. They were hired professionals, part of a coordinated effort to, at minimum, abduct me, and quite possibly worse." The words landed like stones, heavy with implication. Lydia's hands, resting on the cool surface of the table, instinctively curled into fists before she forced them to relax. "How can you be sure?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. In response, Elias nodded toward a tablet that the security officer placed on the table between them. It displayed footage from the garage security cameras, multiple angles capturing the precision with which the masked man had emerged, their coordinated movements, and then Lydia's unexpected intervention. Watching herself move with a skill she had almost forgotten she possessed was disorienting, like seeing a stranger who wore her face but carried herself with a confidence Lydia had abandoned years ago. The footage continued, showing police subduing the attackers and then cut to mugshots and identification information. These men have connections to a security firm that operates in legally questionable territory, Elias explained, swiping through screens of information. They're mercenaries for hire, not common criminals. We've been tracing their recent communications, legal before you ask, through channels available to us given the direct threat. And what we've discovered is concerning. Your name and address were transmitted to an unknown recipient early this morning. In short, Ms. Park, you've been identified, and in their line of work, witnesses or obstacles are treated as problems to be eliminated. The clinical way he delivered this news, devoid of unnecessary softening, reminded Lydia that this man had built an empire through strategic calculation and unemotional decision-making. Yet she detected something else beneath his business-like exterior, a genuine concern that seemed at odds with the stereotype of a ruthless CEO. "I need to get Maya," she said, pushing back her chair with sudden urgency, maternal instinct overriding all other considerations. "If what you're saying is true, I need to collect my daughter and—" She paused, the reality of their situation crashing over her. And what? Go where? Do what? They had no family to flee to, no resources to disappear, no alternative life waiting in the wings. Elias raised a hand in a calming gesture, seeming to anticipate her spiral of thought. "We've already arranged security for your daughter's school. Discreet but effective. She's being monitored, and the team has instructions to intercept any suspicious individuals. She's safe for the moment, but you're right. This situation requires immediate action, which is why I've called you here today." Elias leaned forward, his expression shifting from explanatory to intent. "I have a proposition for you, Ms. Park, one that addresses several problems simultaneously." He gestured toward the security footage still frozen on the tablet screen, capturing Lydia in mid-movement, her body positioned with perfect balance as she neutralized an armed attacker. "What you demonstrated last night wasn't just courage. It was exceptional skill. You moved with training and precision that my security experts have confirmed is professional grade. Before you became a janitor at Sterling Enterprises, you ran a martial arts studio with your late husband, specializing in a combination of traditional disciplines and practical defense techniques. You were, by all accounts, highly respected in those circles. And now I find myself in the peculiar position of needing someone with exactly your capabilities." The direction of the conversation was becoming clear, and Lydia felt a cold weight settling in her stomach. "I'm a janitor, Mr. Ward. Whatever I was before, that life is gone. I have responsibilities now, routines, stability I've fought hard to establish." The words sounded hollow even to her own ears, defensive shields against the truth that her carefully constructed life had already been dismantled the moment she stepped between Elias Ward and his attackers. He seemed to sense her internal conflict, his expression softening fractionally, before he delivered his proposal with the directness of someone accustomed to negotiating high-stakes deals. "I want you to become my head of security, Ms. Park. Effective immediately. With a salary that will be, I assure you, substantially more than you currently earn across your 3 jobs. You'll have resources, a team to command, and most importantly, the corporate protection that comes with a visible official position in my executive structure." Whatever Lydia had been expecting, it wasn't this. The absurdity of the suggestion, from night janitor to head of security in one impossible leap, might have made her laugh if the circumstances weren't so grave. That's not possible," she managed, fighting to maintain her composure. "I have no corporate experience, no connections in that world. Your board would never approve such an appointment." Elias's mouth curved into what might have been his first genuine smile since their unusual acquaintance began. "My board serves at my pleasure, Ms. Park, not the other way around. But more practically, what I'm proposing serves multiple strategic purposes. It places you in a position where you have legitimate access to resources that can protect both you and your daughter. It brings your considerable skills into my organization where they can be put to use, rather than wasted on cleaning services. And perhaps most importantly, it presents a united front to whoever orchestrated last night's attack, a message that rather than eliminating witnesses, they've now strengthened my position. The logic was seductively sound, yet Lydia sensed layers beneath the proposition that remained unspoken. "And if I refuse?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. There was no path back to the life she had before, no way to unsee what she had witnessed, to unknown what she now knew about the dangers circling around Elias Ward, and by extension herself and Maya. Elias met her gaze directly, all pretense of business negotiation falling away. "Then I will still ensure your protection and your daughter's, to the best of my ability, but it will be more difficult, more constrained. You'll be looking over your shoulder indefinitely, living with restrictions that will feel like a different kind of prison. I'm not threatening you, Ms. Park. I'm offering you a way forward that preserves your autonomy and dignity, while acknowledging the reality of our situation. We find ourselves unwilling allies against a common threat. I'm simply suggesting we formalize that alliance in a way that benefits us both." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of decision, of paths diverging irrevocably. Through the glass walls, Lydia could see the corporate machinery of Sterling Enterprises continuing its relentless forward motion. Deals being made, fortunes rising and falling, power consolidated and wielded. A world entirely foreign to her, yet one she was being asked to enter through a side door, opened by violence and necessity. She thought of Maya, of the opportunities a substantial salary could provide. A better school, a safer neighborhood, college funds that wouldn't require crushing debt. She thought of the martial arts skills she had set aside, the part of herself that had awakened in that garage confrontation, vibrant and purposeful after years of dormancy. And she thought of the nameless, faceless threat now looming over them, the transmitted information that made her a target rather than just a witness. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the resolve of a decision already crystallizing into certainty. "I'll need certain conditions met. Maya's safety is non-negotiable. And I'll need time, training in the corporate aspects of the role, understanding of the organizational structure. I won't be a figurehead or a publicity stunt." Elias nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. A man accustomed to recognizing the moment when a deal has effectively been struck, even as details remain to be negotiated. "Of course, we'll draw up the specifics this afternoon, but first," he rose, extending his hand across the table. "Welcome to Sterling Enterprises, Ms. Park. I believe this is the beginning of a most interesting partnership." The Sterling Tower Executive Suite buzzed with tightly controlled chaos as word of Lydia's appointment spread through the upper echelons of the company. Administrative assistants cast curious glances her way as Elias's chief of staff, a razor-thin woman named Vivian, with a perpetual expression of efficient skepticism, guided Lydia through a whirlwind orientation. There were forms to sign, security protocols to review, biometric data to capture for building access, and a company credit card issued with a spending limit that made Lydia's breath catch when Vivian mentioned it casually, as though such sums were unremarkable. Throughout the afternoon, Lydia's phone chimed with updates from the security detail assigned to Maya, text messages confirming her daughter's movements from classroom to after-school program, accompanied by discreet photos showing her absorbed in activities, blissfully unaware of the seismic shifts occurring in their lives. Each confirmation eased a fraction of the tight knot of anxiety in Lydia's chest, allowing her to focus on the avalanche of information being presented to her. The previous head of security was let go. Rather abruptly this morning, Vivian explained as she led Lydia toward what would now be her office, a space that had been hastily cleared of personal effects belonging to her predecessor. The official statement cites security failures requiring immediate leadership change, which isn't entirely untrue, given last night's incident. The unspoken question lingered in the air between them. How had Lydia, a night janitor with no corporate experience, suddenly found herself in a position that typically required decades of security? industry experience, and connections. Vivian was too professional to ask directly, but her arched eyebrow spoke volumes. "Mr. Ward has his reasons," she continued, her tone neutral but pointed. "And while those reasons are his business, the practical implications of this transition are mine. You'll have a team of 17 security professionals reporting to you, most of whom have military or law enforcement backgrounds. They'll expect competence and clarity. I suggest you provide both." The office itself was intimidating, a corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, minimalist furnishings that spoke of functionality rather than comfort, and an array of monitors displaying security feeds from throughout the building. A desk phone blinked with waiting messages, and a laptop hummed with active security protocols that Lydia would need to learn quickly. As Vivian departed with a final assessing look, Lydia sank into the executive chair, its leather cool against her back, and allowed herself a moment of pure, unadulterated panic. What had she agreed to? The salary Elias offered was life-changing, more than 5 times her combined income from her multiple jobs, with benefits and housing allowance that would transform her and Maya's standard of living. But the responsibilities were equally massive, the learning curve vertical, and the stakes potentially lethal. She placed her palms flat on the desk surface, willing her heartbeat to slow, drawing on the breathing techniques she had once taught to nervous first-time students at the dojo. A soft knock interrupted her moment of centered calm, and the door opened to reveal a man with the solid build and watchful eyes of someone with specialized training. He introduced himself as Marcus Reynolds, the deputy head of security who had been with Sterling Enterprises for 7 years. His expression was carefully neutral, revealing neither resentment at being passed over for promotion nor enthusiasm for her appointment. "Mr. Ward asked me to brief you on our current security protocols and team structure," he said, placing a tablet on the desk between them, "and to assist with your transition." The slight pause conveyed volumes about what he thought of this unusual situation, but his professionalism remained intact. As Marcus walked her through the security infrastructure, personnel deployments, technology systems, risk assessment frameworks, Lydia listened with intense focus, asking questions that gradually shifted his expression from restrained politeness to reluctant respect. "You mentioned the team that was assigned to Mr. Ward last night," Lydia said, circling back to the attack in the garage. 3-person detail, standard procedure for after-hours executive protection. Where were they when the ambush occurred? Marcus's jaw tightened, the question touching a nerve. They were called away by what appeared to be a security breach on the 38th floor, a motion detector alarm that shouldn't have been triggered after hours. By the time they realized it was a diversion, the attack in the garage was already underway, or rather had already been thwarted. He studied her with new intensity. "By you, the team is facing disciplinary review for leaving their principal vulnerable. It's a textbook failure of protection protocols." Lydia processed this information, the tactical elements clicking into place. So whoever planned this had inside knowledge of the security systems, enough to create a convincing diversion and predict how the team would respond. That level of information isn't available to outsiders. The implication hung heavy in the air between them. The threat came from within. Marcus nodded slowly, seeming to reassess her in light of this observation. "That's the current working theory. We've been conducting internal reviews since early this morning, but without knowing who to trust." He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished but clear. A security organization compromised from within was like an immune system attacking itself, dangerous and difficult to diagnose. Lydia felt a renewed wave of vertigo at the complexity of what she had stepped into. This wasn't just about protecting one man from external threats. It was about identifying corruption within the very system she was now supposed to lead. The weight of responsibility pressed against her chest, momentarily stealing her breath before she forced herself back to the practical concerns at hand. As evening approached, Lydia was escorted to a company apartment that had been hastily arranged for her and Maya, a luxury high-rise with security features that would have seemed paranoid just 24 hours ago, but now felt woefully inadequate. Maya's reaction to the sudden upheaval ranged from excitement at the spacious rooms and rooftop pool to confusion about why they needed to leave their familiar apartment. "It's like we're in a spy movie," she whispered as Lydia helped her unpack the few belongings they had been allowed to collect from their old place, security personnel standing guard outside their door. "Are you a secret agent now, Mom?" The question, asked with childlike wonder untainted by fear, pierced Lydia's heart. How much should she tell her daughter? How could she explain that their lives had been irrevocably altered by a split-second decision in an underground garage, that unknown dangers now circled around them like sharks scenting blood and water? She settled for a simplified version of the truth. Mr. Ward had offered her an important job helping keep people safe, and that meant some changes for a while. Later, after Maya had finally fallen asleep in her new bedroom with its view of the glittering city skyline, Lydia stood at the living room window, her reflection ghostly against the darkness beyond. The enormity of the day's events washed over her in waves. The corporate politics she would need to navigate, the security threats she must identify and neutralize, the team of professionals now looking to her for leadership, and beneath it all, the fundamental question of who had orchestrated the attack on Elias Ward and why. Her phone buzzed with a message from the man himself. "Security briefing, 7 a.m. tomorrow. We'll begin identifying our adversary. Rest well, Ms. Park. Tomorrow the real work begins." She stared at the message, her mind racing through possibilities and scenarios, strategy and contingency. For years after David's death, she had narrowed her existence to the basics of survival. Work, care for Maya, sleep, repeat. Now life had suddenly expanded into dangerous new dimensions, awakening parts of herself she had deliberately put to sleep. As she finally turned away from the window, moving silently through the unfamiliar apartment to check on Maya one more time before attempting rest, Lydia acknowledged a truth she had been avoiding all day. Beneath the fear and uncertainty, there was a quickening of something that felt dangerously like purpose, like the person she had once been stirring to life again after a long, necessary hibernation. Morning light spilled across the conference room table where Elias Ward had assembled what he called his crisis team, a select group that included Marcus Reynolds, Vivian Chen, the company's legal counsel Jeffrey Harrington, and now Lydia. Coffee steamed from porcelain mugs bearing the Sterling Enterprises logo, and platters of untouched pastries sat in the center of the table. The formality of hospitality at odds with the gravity of the meeting. Digital screens along one wall displayed security footage, financial data, and personnel files, creating a war room atmosphere that matched the tension crackling in the air. Lydia had arrived early, spending the pre-dawn hours reviewing security protocols and personnel files, determined to appear competent despite the impossible learning curve she faced. She had left Maya sleeping in the company apartment, a security detail stationed outside, with arrangements made for a private tutor rather than school attendance until the situation stabilized, a disruption that would require careful explanation to her perceptive daughter later. "Let's begin with what we know," Elias said, his voice carrying the crisp authority of a man accustomed to command. He had forgone his usual suit jacket, the sleeves of his tailored shirt rolled to the elbows, suggesting both intensity and a willingness to engage directly with the crisis. The attack was professionally orchestrated, requiring inside knowledge of our security protocols and my schedule. The objective appears to have been abduction, rather than assassination, though the end goal remains unclear. And as of this morning, we have reason to believe the orchestrator is someone with significant access and authority within Sterling Enterprises. He gestured toward Marcus, who tapped a command into his tablet, changing the display on the wall screens to show surveillance images of a woman in her mid-40s, elegant and severe in appearance, her dark hair cut in a precise bob that emphasized sharp cheekbones and calculating eyes. Claudia Pierce, Executive Vice President of Strategic Development, Marcus announced, his tone professionally detached despite the bombshell he was delivering. "We've traced communications between her private server and the security firm that employed our garage attackers. The exchanges are coded but indicate financial transactions and information sharing that aligns precisely with the timeline of the attack preparation." Lydia studied the image of Claudia Pierce committing the face to memory. This was the enemy, the threat to navigate. She had encountered the woman occasionally during her night shifts, glimpsing her working late in her office on the executive floor, always impeccably dressed even at midnight, radiating an aura of contained ambition that seemed to lower the temperature in any room she occupied. Now, knowing what she did, Lydia recalled the cold assessment in Claudia's eyes on the rare occasions their paths had crossed, a dismissive glance that rendered cleaning staff invisible, beneath notice or concern. Claudia has been positioning herself for my job for years, Elias explained, his expression hardening as he looked at the image of his apparent adversary. She's brilliant, driven, and utterly ruthless in pursuit of her ambitions. We've had philosophical disagreements about the direction of the company. She favors aggressive expansion and acquisition at any cost, while I've advocated for more sustainable growth and ethical business practices, but I never imagined she would escalate to this level. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. The board meets next week to vote on a proposed merger that Claudia has championed against my recommendations. If I were to suddenly become unavailable, before that vote, contingency protocols would place her in temporary control. Enough time to push through her agenda and consolidate power before questions about my absence became problematic. Jeffrey Harrington, the legal counsel, cleared his throat, his discomfort evident as he adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. We need to be extremely careful about making accusations without ironclad evidence, he cautioned, the natural caution of a man trained to anticipate legal repercussions. Ms. Pierce has powerful allies on the board and connections throughout the industry. Moving against her prematurely could backfire catastrophically. Vivian nodded in agreement, adding, "We need more than circumstantial electronic communications. We need concrete proof of her involvement, preferably in her own words or actions." The room fell silent as the magnitude of the challenge settled over them. They were alleging corporate conspiracy at the highest level against a formidable opponent who had already demonstrated a willingness to employ violence to achieve her goals. Lydia, who had been listening intently while scanning the data displayed on the screens, spoke for the first time since the meeting began. What do we know about her daily routines, her vulnerabilities, the people she trusts? The questions earned her sharp looks from Jeffrey and Vivian, but Elias nodded encouragingly, seeming to appreciate her direct approach to threat assessment. Marcus tapped his tablet again, bringing up a new set of data points: Claudia's schedule, security access logs, communication patterns. She's methodical, consistent in her routines. Early arrival at the office, late departure. Lunch ordered in rather than going out. Few personal relationships within the company, but a small circle of loyal staff who handle her administrative needs. She conducts sensitive conversations in her private office, which has been swept for listening devices weekly at her insistence. He paused before adding, "She's careful, calculating. She wouldn't have moved against Mr. Ward without a comprehensive plan, including contingencies." "And now that contingency includes me?" Lydia said, the realization crystallizing as she spoke. She couldn't have anticipated my intervention in the garage, which means her original plan has been disrupted. She'll be recalibrating, assessing this new variable, trying to understand who I am and how I fit into the equation. Elias nodded, his expression grim but determined. "Precisely. Which is why your abrupt promotion to head of security serves multiple strategic purposes. It announces that not only did her attempt fail, but it's actually strengthened my position. It creates uncertainty about your background and capabilities, forcing her to divert resources to investigating you, and it places you in a position to monitor and counter her next moves, which I assure you are already being formulated." The clinical way he described using her as both shield and weapon should have been disturbing, but Lydia recognized the tactical soundness of the approach. In the dojo, she had taught students that position and leverage were often more important than raw strength, a principle that apparently applied to corporate warfare as much as physical combat. The meeting continued for hours, strategies proposed and discarded, surveillance plans developed, legal boundaries carefully delineated. Throughout the intense discussion, Lydia observed the dynamics between these powerful figures: Elias's natural authority, Vivian's razor-sharp efficiency, Jeffrey's risk-averse caution, and Marcus's tactical precision. She was an outsider in this world of corporate intrigue, yet her unique perspective as someone who had moved invisibly through the building for years offered insights the others lacked. "The cleaning staff," she said during a discussion of potential intelligence gathering, "they're invisible to executives like Claudia. They work in her office while she's present, emptying trash, wiping surfaces. They hear conversations, see documents. They might have observed patterns or details that could be valuable." The suggestion was met with thoughtful consideration, a recognition that Lydia brought unconventional but potentially valuable approaches to their predicament. As the meeting concluded with assigned action items and follow-up protocols established, Elias asked Lydia to remain behind. When the others had departed, he studied her with an intensity that made her acutely aware of the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. "How are you handling all of this?" he asked, the question surprising her with its genuine concern. For a moment, the corporate mask slipped, revealing a man carrying burdens beyond what was visible in the boardroom. Responsibility for thousands of employees, the weight of decisions that affected countless lives, and now, the betrayal of a trusted colleague who had apparently marked him for removal. Lydia considered deflecting with a professional assurance that she was managing well, but the events of the past 36 hours had stripped away her capacity for pretense. "I'm terrified," she admitted, the honesty a relief after hours of projected confidence. "For Maya, for myself, I'm drowning in information about a world I barely understand, trying to protect a man I hardly know from threats I'm still struggling to comprehend. But," she paused, surprised by the truth of what she was about to say, "I'm also more alive than I've felt in years. Since David died, I've been existing, not living, keeping my head down, staying invisible, focusing only on Maya's needs and basic survival. This is," she gestured to encompass the conference room, "the crisis, her new role. Terrifying, yes, but also clarifying, purposeful." Elias nodded, something like recognition flickering across his features. "I understand more than you might think," he said quietly, moving to stand at the window that overlooked the city sprawling below them. "This company was my father's creation, his legacy. When he died unexpectedly 5 years ago, I inherited not just his position, but the target on my back. Claudia worked for him, was mentored by him. She believed the succession should have been hers, based on merit rather than bloodline. And perhaps she wasn't entirely wrong. I was thrust into this role with ideals but limited experience, learning leadership through trial by fire." He turned back to face Lydia, his expression resolute. "But what she fails to understand is that my father built this company on principles beyond mere profit, ethical considerations that she dismisses as sentimental limitations on growth. The merger she's pushing would dismantle those principles, prioritizing short-term financial gains over long-term sustainability and responsibility. That's the true battle here, not just for control of Sterling Enterprises, but for its soul. And now, somehow, you've become entangled in this struggle." The unexpected vulnerability in his explanation shifted something in Lydia's perception of the man before her. No longer just the remote figure of authority she had glimpsed from the shadows during her night shifts, but a person navigating his own treacherous waters of responsibility and principle. "We'll find a way through this," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "For Maya's safety, for your company's future, for the people who depend on both, we'll find a way." Elias studied her for a long moment, as though assessing the weight her words could bear, before nodding once, a gesture that seemed to seal something unspoken between them. "Yes," he agreed, the simple affirmation carrying unexpected warmth. "I believe we will. Now, I believe you have a security team waiting for their first briefing from their new leader. Shall we show them what unexpected allies are capable of when necessity brings them together?" As they walked side by side toward the door, Lydia felt the strange sense that they had crossed some invisible threshold. from reluctant participants in circumstances beyond their control to active shapers of what would unfold next, bound by mutual need, but also by something less definable, a recognition of shared purpose that had nothing to do with corporate hierarchies and everything to do with the people they chose to be when challenges revealed their core truths. Lydia steps into the role of head of security with a grit that outpaces the team's mixed reception, using sleepless days to master protocols, floor plans, and threat maps while masking strain for Maya's sake. She reads the command center like a dojo, steady voice, clean lines, nothing wasted, even as veteran loyalists bristle. Intelligence points to Claudia Pierce preparing a new move timed to a board vote, her private servers buzzing, and consultants slipping in with temporary badges. Marcus Reynolds, once wary, shifts into an ally as Lydia sets layered protections around Elias and widens surveillance nets. The goal is simple, but razor-thin. Anticipate without tipping how much they know. The tone is preparation, tension, and the slow return of leadership muscle memory that grief had told her to bury. When Elias brings word of a pre-board ambush built on insinuations about his sanity, Lydia maps the boardroom battlefield in her head. Claudia's strategy aims not at bodies but at credibility, reframing the garage attack as delusion while corrupted footage erases proof. Lydia pivots from defense to provocation, proposing a controlled leak that implies evidence tying Claudia to the assault. If Claudia hunts the phantom source, her methods and partners surface with her. It is risk embraced as instrument, a calculated disruption of a narrative she refuses to cede. Elias recognizes the shift, and the trust between them hardens from necessity into choice. They seed the rumor channels Claudia monitors, tighten rotations, and brace for backlash. The response comes fast. Digital tremors, unscheduled consultants, heightened sweeps, and deep dives into Elias's crisis team files, Lydia's background included. The trap works well enough to ruin Claudia's private pre-meeting and, more importantly, to leave footprints worth following. Jeffrey, cautious by training and temperament, begins to concede the plan's effectiveness as evidence accrues. In the quiet edges of the night, Lydia's resolve is anchored by Maya's sleeping face and the vow beneath it. She fights for a life beyond reaction, hers and her daughter's, one step ahead of a predator who assumes her prey status. Amid preparations for the full board session, Lydia integrates the fragments of her past: fighter, widow, janitor, strategist. The building becomes a chessboard she now reads from the center rather than the margins. Elias asks the question he has carried since the garage, why she intervened, and her answer threads instinct with duty to a self she almost abandoned. He admits his own years of compartmentalization, the leadership performance that muted compassion, and the dawning belief that integration is strength. Their candor is brief, pierced by an alert. Unscheduled gear at Claudia's division and executive overrides at the door. Personal truth recedes as operational poise returns. The boardroom is ceremony and theater, glass and mahogany, and the weight of portraits watching. Lydia stations herself for maximum sightlines while Jeffrey drones through prelude numbers and the merger storm gathers. Their week-long dance with Claudia has yielded receipts, shell transactions, encrypted ties to hired muscle, a junior associate's testimony, and off-site copies of uncorrupted footage. Claudia presents synergy and inevitability with polish, then slides the knife. Elias as heir blinded by legacy, the garage incident as paranoia in a stressed mind. It is weaponized concern, practiced and precise, designed to make defense look like proof of guilt. Lydia waits for the signal, anger cold and contained. Elias rises, calm as a scalpel, and signals the reveal. Lydia hands each board member a folder while he narrates the spine of the conspiracy, not as theater but as ledger. Claudia denies, demands counsel, and searches for exits that security has already closed. What follows is a methodical unraveling. The board's disbelief fractures into silence, then into procedural gravity. Access is cut, the meeting adjourned, and corporate house arrest replaces corporate myth. Claudia's final whisper to Lydia acknowledges the new terrain. Predators recognize each other. and promises consequences beyond the walls. After the rupture come the logistics, statements, legal handoffs, isolation of loyalists, and an indefinitely postponed merger. The immediate battle is won. The war merely changed shape, because networks do not vanish when one node fails. Fatigue spreads through the crisis team as adrenaline drains, leaving competence and caution to keep watch. In the hush of evening, Elias thanks Lydia without armor, measuring the life she saved against the order she restored. He asks what comes next, not only for the role built in emergency, but for the partnership forged beside it. Possibility enters the room and refuses to leave. Lydia names her doubt, a world she wasn't trained for, a role she only meant to borrow, while Elias answers with character over pedigree and learning over lineage. The conversation edges past titles to the question of belonging, then steadies on Maya, the constant in every calculation. He promises resources and respect, and risks a quiet truth. His concern has become personal. Then a text from the apartment resets priorities, a child with science fair news tugging the future into focus. Lydia takes the space she needs, and Elias grants it without condition. Choice, not crisis, becomes the next step. Back in the apartment, Maya's joy stitches the day together, vertical gardens and hypotheses crowding out the residue of confrontation. Lydia feels the internal pieces align, not as a return to the past, but as a new whole. Protector, teacher, strategist, mother, and woman with room for hope. At the window, she drafts a message that is both contract and invitation. Let's shape this role to last, and see what else might belong. Sending it is a threshold crossed on purpose, not as escape, but as embrace. The city outside is less a gauntlet than a map, lit by work and by what could be. In the space after danger, Lydia chooses the harder courage, building.